Let's start here. The spotlight is on higher education in the Standing Committee for Public Accounts. Now, this comes after SCOPA rejected Higher Education Minister Nzimande's request to keep a forensic report on possible corruption in the National Skills Fund under wraps. Now, the matter is before Parliament this afternoon, but Nzimande sent his apologies saying he's travelling. His deputy, Buti Manamela, is before the committee and saying 5 officials have been placed on precautionary suspension and the Hawks have been asked to investigate. Let's speak now to Asanda Ngoasheng, who's a political analyst. Asanda, thank you so much for your time. Let's start with the report. I mean, it came out in March this year, but we then are seeing the fact that there were attempts to keep this particular report private, and confidential. At the same time, these are billions that have been unaccounted for over 2 years here. And it's an astonishing figure. The department saying 5 officials have been placed on precautionary suspension this afternoon and the Hawks are now involved. But I wonder, it took too long, didn't it?
Yeah, it definitely took too long. And I mean, I was just listening in now to the live, and what's really concerning is some of the things that have been highlighted by the investigation. Like, for example, the service providers are supposed to show that they have, a separate accounts for each individual project, and there was no monitoring of that, to a point where the Auditor General was not able to get documentation that they needed to be able to conclude some of the investigation that they were doing. So that's generally a lack of oversight. There also are reports that, various officials were giving in reports of having done site visits, which obviously turned out to not have been done. And if they were, and in cases when they were done, they were not done sufficiently, or there wasn't truth about what was seen or not seen. And essentially, a lot of these projects have turned out to be money laundering, to be fraud, and to be all sorts of things. And what's really upsetting for me about this particular issue is that we are a country that sits with almost, we're chasing 50% unemployment. And the money that is supposed to be allocated for skills development is simply going to crooks and criminals who are related or friends or somehow linked to officials in the department, or somehow linked to politicians, because that is the only way you can get away with 2.5 billion, which is where they're putting it now. As far as the hearing has gone, they haven't explained about the other 2.5, but they're dealing with 2.5. And these seemingly great projects, but, some of the concerns are there was no research done. For example, there's a project that was supposed to be a rabbit breeding project. And at the time that the tender was given, the biggest rabbit breeder was actually under liquidation. And one of the suggestions that's coming out is that there was supposed to have been research to say, why is this person being liquidated? Because we need to understand that in order for us to be able to say this project is a go or not a go. And because that research wasn't done, there wasn't also, in terms of the presentation, there wasn't a clear understanding of, once these rabbits have been bred, what happens to them. And I mean, I think that's a very basic thing that you should be asking. You are saying we're going to breed animals. What is the market, and where does the market exist? And it says the market is in China. Who's already providing, rabbits to China? And how are we going to ensure that we either get a lion's share of that market or that we have a new market? And it's really, really sad for me, and it's quite scary that, you have people who are supposed to be experts in these things, who sit on these panels, who sit on these tender boards, and they are simply not doing their job. And you have officials who are being paid to monitor and evaluate, and they are simply not doing their job. And when they are pretending to do their job, they're looking the other way because they are also part of the corruption. And so you get this sense that South Africa is essentially being run by criminal syndicates called tenderpreneurs, using various interesting and nefarious means to get access to the national purse.
And, Asanda, I was listening to the Deputy Minister this afternoon in his opening remarks before the DG took over. He says that there was nothing untoward in the move to keep the report private. There was nothing to hide. They're not trying to protect any individuals here. And the Minister talks about how seriously they are taking this particular issue. And for them, it is of concern that, public funds have been misused in this particular way. But when you look at the time that has lapsed, I mean, getting the report in March and looking at the fact that Parliament even had to invoke its own laws to force them to say that you need to bring this report to the public, it really boggles the mind as to how seriously they actually took it.
They didn't take it seriously. I mean, the minister was supposed to be the one presenting this report, and apparently he said that he was traveling at the time and is not able to present himself, and so he sent his deputy minister. I mean, this is your department, minister. 5 billion rands in a country with high unemployment, in a country with young people crying out that they don't have opportunities for skills development, and you don't know what happened to 5 billion in that department, and you cannot cancel whatever trip it was to be able to rock up in Parliament for the most important day of your career right now. It is really disappointing. It is really frustrating. And it just shows just how little care the ANC leaders and people like people like Blade and Nzimande, the lack of care, the lack of, urgency around these issues, and the lack of understanding of what these issues mean in terms of bread and butter issues, because young people are sitting unemployed, unskilled, unable to access the very economy of this country, when the money that has been given to government to be able to implement these, skills development and these skills implementation systems is just simply disappearing down the throats of various people who, by the way, have not even been mentioned. And so some of the names were mentioned, but even in terms of the way the presentation was done, you could barely see what was being said. Half of the time, the volume was down. And so all of that just contributes to, yes, it's great that Parliament Live, you're able to watch it and you get the information, but you really have to strain to hear what is being said, and you really have to strain your eyes to see what is being said, which cancels out the whole point of transparency, because that presentation itself should have been up on the website by the time they went to present, so that if they are doing what they did, which was to keep it on the wrong slide for most of the presentation, at least I would have been able to follow it. And any other South African who is interested in this issue would have been able to follow it. And there are many South Africans who are interested in this issue, because we are a very young country with high unemployment, and this has to do with youth and skills development.
And Asanda, we really are keen. I mean, when I was listening to it, also just the volume kept going up and down, and you really can't hear, as you say. But the Deputy Minister, before handing over, he said that they're trying to prevent this from happening in future. He says the Skills Fund is now in the process of developing a new audit development plan to prevent such from happening in future. I wonder if that, in your view, could help at all?
Of course it can help, but the problem that we have is that if it is the very people at the top who are part and parcel of this corruption, it doesn't matter how many systems you put in place. They will break through those systems and they will find a way around them. So the problem of South Africa is not actually whether we have systems or financial, monitoring systems. It is that the people who are doing the stealing are sitting right at the top, and they are collaborating with public servants to be corrupt. And when that happens, it doesn't matter if you have 10 laws, if you have 10 kind of systems, it's not going to make a difference, because the person who's meant to sign the final signature is the one that is saying it's a go. If there's one thing that we should have learned out of state capture, is that state capture was able to happen because the people sitting at the top were the ones who were most implicated, and the people who are supposed to stop the signature from being signed are the very ones who are signing the signature and ensuring that everybody along the value chain signs the signature or is fired or removed. And I suspect that the more we dig into this case, that is what we're going to find. And I think that, for the longest time, the Department of Higher Education has been able to get away with all kinds of, things, but we're not thinking about the fact that, not too long ago, students were crying and saying fees must fall. Students were crying and saying they are not able to access their democratic right of free education, and the government was saying they cannot fund free education, and yet the same government is able to lose 5 billion I want to repeat that number because it's astounding. 5 billion rands, which is life-changing in a country such as ours, disappeared with very little information on what happened to it. And they're talking about going to. Charges are still in process. Like nobody has appeared in court. Nobody is in jail. It's ridiculous that they've had since March. And yet we are not talking about people being behind bars. And I think that honestly, it's time that the government starts to implement a system of specialized criminal courts that are going to focus particularly on corruption and expediting corruption cases, because it's unacceptable that it takes so long for these cases to, first of all, be heard in Parliament, and secondly, for these people to be prosecuted. The reason why we sit to the likes of Jacob Zuma, who is sitting with, hundreds and hundreds of criminal cases that have yet to be heard for more than 10 years, is precisely because we have not prioritized corruption, even though it is the most crippling crime. It is a crime that is killing this entire nation. And it is the crime that reminds us that at this point in time, it actually doesn't matter which individuals you are talking about in the ANC. The system itself is inherently corrupt. And it doesn't matter if you change one face and you put another face, you're going to get the same results, because the system is inherently corrupt, and it is the people who are meant to be safeguarding the system. The people who are meant to be ensuring corruption doesn't happen, and the people who are meant to be ensuring that service delivery is a priority and the futures of young people are guaranteed. They are the ones who are caught with their hands in the cookie jar.
All right, Asanda, let's watch this one and see what comes out of the SCOPA sitting, as we see the AG is also there, the SIU and the Hawks are now involved. So let's see what happens with this one, because really it is concerning. And you look at the soaring numbers of unemployed young people, and you look at these billions that are now unaccounted for where the National Skills Fund is concerned. But we'll continue to monitor the story. That was political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng.